My name is Nathan Reed. I'm 49 years old, and for 14 years I served as Senior Operations Manager at Meridian Supply Solutions, headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. We were a mid-sized industrial distribution company that specialized in supplying critical raw materials, precision machinery components, and specialized tooling to manufacturing plants across the Southeast United States. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was essential. When our clients' production lines depended on timely delivery of high-tolerance parts, we were the invisible bridge that kept everything running. I wasn't the type who sought the spotlight. I didn't give motivational speeches or chase recognition in quarterly town halls. My satisfaction came from different places, from walking the warehouse floor at 6 a.m. and knowing every process by heart, from negotiating better freight rates that saved the company hundreds of thousands annually, and from mentoring young coordinators who later went on to manage their own teams. Over 14 years, I had built systems, refined procedures, and developed institutional knowledge that couldn't be found in any operations manual. Most people outside the department had no idea how much depended on the quiet consistency I maintained. But inside Meridian, especially among the warehouse supervisors and senior coordinators, it was common knowledge. I was the person they called when a shipment went missing at midnight, when a key supplier suddenly raised prices, or when a major client threatened to pull their contract because of repeated delays. I never minded. That was simply the nature of the job. My wife Sarah often joked that I treated Meridian like it was my own small business. In many ways, she was right. I knew the names of nearly every driver in our contracted fleet. I remembered which plants preferred morning deliveries, and which ones needed temperature-controlled transport for sensitive materials. I could look at a single logistics report and spot problems weeks before they became visible to leadership. It wasn't genius. It was 14 years of accumulated experience, attention to detail, and a deep understanding of how the entire supply chain actually functioned in the real world, not just on spreadsheets. For the first several years, my direct supervisor, Derek Langford, seemed to appreciate that dedication. Derek was the vice president of operations, a competent enough executive who had climbed the ladder through a mix of political skill and decent results. During my annual performance reviews, he would lean back in his leather chair, fold his hands, and deliver the same well-rehearsed line year after year. "Nathan, you're the backbone of this department. We literally couldn't operate at this level without you. The director position is going to open up soon, and when it does, you're at the very top of the list." I believed him for the first 8 years. By year 9 I had stopped believing the words but continued doing the work anyway. The salary was solid. The benefits were excellent. Our daughter Emily was finishing college, and Sarah had finally built a stable accounting practice after years of struggle. Rocking the boat felt unnecessary, so I kept showing up, kept solving problems, and kept waiting for a promotion that seemed permanently just around the corner. Looking back now, the warning signs were there if I had chosen to see them clearly. Around year 11, the company brought in a wave of younger MBAs with impressive resumes but very little floor experience. They spoke fluently about optimization, digital transformation, and leveraging data analytics. They created new KPIs and dashboards that looked beautiful in presentations, but often failed to account for real-world variables like sudden carrier strikes, weather disruptions, or the subtle differences in how different manufacturing plants operated. I adapted as best I could. I spent extra hours translating their new systems into practical processes that actually worked. I quietly fixed the gaps they left behind, and I never complained publicly. My role, as I saw it, was to make the company successful, not to win arguments in meeting rooms. Then Tyler Brooks joined the company. He was 31, energetic, well-spoken, and fresh out of a top-tier MBA program. Within weeks, he was presenting bold ideas in leadership meetings. Derek seemed particularly impressed with him. Tyler had that confident, modern executive presence that photographs well and sounds intelligent in conference calls. What he lacked in practical operations experience, he made up for in ambition and polished slide decks. I didn't resent Tyler at first. Young talent is important. But I did notice how quickly Derek started forwarding him high-visibility projects, while my own responsibilities remained largely unchanged. Still, I kept my focus on doing my job well. The moment everything changed arrived on a Thursday morning in March last year. The company had organized its annual regional leadership conference at a upscale conference center in Charlotte, North Carolina. Nearly 200 managers, directors and key personnel from 5 states were in attendance. The agenda was filled with presentations about growth strategy, new technology implementations, and building the next generation of leadership. I sat in the third row, wearing a navy suit I had bought years ago for Emily's college graduation. Derek was on stage delivering what everyone expected to be the highlight of the morning, his vision for the future of Meridian Supply Solutions. He spoke confidently about aggressive expansion plans, implementation of a new ERP system, and the need for dynamic, forward-thinking leadership to take the company to the next level. The audience nodded along. Then he paused, smiled, and said the words that would alter the trajectory of my career. As part of our strategic restructuring, I'm pleased to announce the new Director of Southeast Operations. A ripple of anticipation moved through the room. Several people glanced in my direction. After 14 years of steady performance and repeated promises, many assumed the role was finally mine. Derek continued without hesitation. Effective next quarter, this position will be filled by Tyler Brooks. The room went strangely quiet for a moment. Then polite applause started, though it sounded muted and uncertain. Derek wasn't finished. Nathan Reed has provided 14 years of dedicated service to this company. Going forward, he will transition into a senior advisor role focused on knowledge transfer and special projects. We're confident this new structure will bring fresh energy while preserving institutional knowledge. I sat perfectly still. There was no private conversation beforehand. No warning. No respectful discussion about my future. Just a public announcement in front of nearly 200 colleagues that I was being passed over demoted, in practice in favor of someone with less than 2 years of experience at the company. I could feel eyes on me. Some looked sympathetic. Others simply looked uncomfortable. A few of the warehouse managers I had personally trained over the years stared at the floor. I didn't react outwardly. No clenched jaw, no sharp intake of breath, no dramatic exit. I simply sat there, hands folded in my lap, maintaining a calm, professional expression while something inside me settled into a very clear, very final decision. 14 years of loyalty, of being the reliable backbone, of catching problems before they became crises. It had all been acknowledged with a polite public demotion and a vague title that carried no real authority. When the session finally ended, I didn't rush to speak with Derek. I didn't pull Tyler aside for an awkward conversation. I simply walked out of the ballroom, took the elevator to my hotel room, and closed the door behind me. Only then, the quiet of that room, did I allow myself a single slow breath. I poured a small measure of whiskey from the minibar, stood by the window overlooking the city, and thought about the years I had given this company. The missed family dinners. The weekends spent troubleshooting logistics failures. The quiet pride I had felt every time a client told me their production line never stopped because of us. And then I thought about the future. For the first time in 14 years, I wasn't angry. I was clear. The flight back to Atlanta the next morning felt unusually quiet. I sat in my usual window seat, watching the clouds drift below, and realized something important had shifted inside me. There was no rage, no burning desire for confrontation, just a cold, crystalline clarity I hadn't felt in years. When I walked through the front door that evening, Sarah was already home. She took one look at my face and knew. "They gave it to Tyler, didn't they?" she asked softly, setting down her glass of wine. I nodded and placed my bag on the kitchen counter. In front of almost 200 people, no warning, just a casual announcement like I was being moved to a slightly smaller desk. Sarah didn't say anything for a moment. She simply walked over and wrapped her arms around me. After 23 years of marriage, she understood me better than anyone. She knew I wasn't the type to shout or storm out. My anger had always been quiet, methodical, and patient. "What are you going to do?" she finally asked. I kissed the top of her head. "For now, exactly what they asked me to do. I'm going to be the best senior advisor this company has ever had." She pulled back and looked at me with that familiar half-smile. "You're scaring me a little, Nathan." "Good," I said, "because I finally stopped scaring myself." Monday morning, I arrived at the office at my usual time, 6:45 a.m. I made coffee, checked the overnight logistics reports, and then did something I had never done in 14 years. I waited. When Tyler sent me his first email asking for historical context on the Southeast carrier contracts, I responded politely within the hour, attaching a clean, professional document that contained exactly what he asked for. Nothing more, nothing less. No additional insights, no warnings about which carriers were reliable during hurricane season. No notes about the verbal agreements I had maintained with certain vendors for years. I was doing my job, precisely as described in my new role. Over the following weeks, I watched as Tyler began implementing his vision with enthusiasm. He introduced new routing software that promised dynamic optimization. He renegotiated several supplier contracts based purely on cost. He reduced overnight shipping approvals to cut expenses. On paper, everything looked efficient and modern. In reality, the cracks began to show almost immediately. The first noticeable issue came in early May. A major automotive parts manufacturer in Birmingham reported 3 consecutive delayed shipments. Their production line had slowed, costing them thousands per hour. The plant manager, a man I had worked with for nearly a decade, called me directly. "Nathan, what the hell is going on over there? We've never had delays like this before." I kept my voice steady. "I'm no longer in day-to-day operations, Richard. Tyler Brooks is now the director. I've forwarded your concerns to him with full context. Let me know if you need any historical data from my side." Richard paused. "You're kidding me." I wish I was. Within a month, our on-time delivery rate, which had consistently stayed above 96% for the past 6 years, dropped to 87%. Customer complaints started rising. Warehouse supervisors, many of whom I had personally trained, began sending me quiet messages asking for advice. I always responded the same way: professional, helpful within my limited role, but never overstepping. I never badmouthed Tyler. I never criticized the new systems in public. I simply stopped doing the invisible work I had been doing for 14 years, the work that had kept problems from ever reaching leadership's desk. By mid-June, the situation had become impossible to ignore. One Thursday afternoon, Derek called me into his office. He looked more tired than usual. Tyler was already sitting there, flipping through reports with a frustrated expression. "Nathan," Derek began, trying to sound casual, "we're seeing some challenges with the new processes. Tyler and I thought you might be able to provide some additional guidance during this transition period." I sat down calmly. "Of course. What specifically would you like me to advise on?" Tyler slid a report across the desk. "The new routing algorithm is flagging too many exceptions. We're burning through overtime budgets trying to fix manual interventions. You used to handle these situations seamlessly. What are we missing?" I scanned the report for a moment, then looked up at both of them. "What you're missing," I said evenly, "is 14 years of understanding how real-world variables interact with these systems. The algorithm doesn't account for seasonal carrier capacity changes, specific plant loading dock restrictions, or the informal relationships I maintained with certain dispatchers. Those things aren't in the data, they live in experience." Derek leaned forward. "So help us fix it, Nate. We need you to be more involved." I nodded politely. "I'm happy to document my observations and recommendations as senior advisor. Would you like me to prepare a formal report by end of week?" The silence that followed was heavy. Tyler finally spoke. "We were hoping for something more hands-on." "I understand," I replied. "Unfortunately, my current role is advisory. If you'd like to revisit my responsibilities and compensation to reflect operational involvement again, I'm open to that discussion." Derek's jaw tightened slightly, but he forced a smile. "We'll consider it." As I left the office that day, I felt no satisfaction, only the quiet confirmation that my decision had been correct. The real pressure began building in July. A pharmaceutical client, one of our largest and most demanding accounts, lost an entire temperature-sensitive shipment because the new routing system had rerouted it through a non-climate-controlled carrier to save costs. The financial loss was significant. More importantly, their trust was gone. They sent a strongly worded letter threatening to move their entire Southeast volume to a competitor. The client's VP of procurement called me personally. "Nathan, we've worked with you for 11 years. This new direction, it doesn't feel like Meridian anymore. Help us understand what's happening." I was honest, but professional. "There has been a change in operational leadership. I'm no longer managing day-to-day execution. However, I remain available in an advisory capacity if the company chooses to utilize me that way." 2 days later, that same client reduced their order volume by 40% and began qualifying alternative suppliers. Inside the company, morale was deteriorating. 3 senior coordinators who had been with me for years submitted their resignations. When HR asked for exit interview notes, several mentioned loss of operational stability and lack of experienced guidance. I continued my work quietly. I documented every request, every handoff, and every limitation I observed. My reports were thorough, factual, and completely neutral in tone. I gave leadership exactly what they had asked for when they changed my role. Nothing more, nothing less. By the end of August, the Southeast region, once the strongest performing division in the company, was officially the weakest. Quarterly numbers were bleeding. Derek was spending more time in damage control meetings than in strategic planning. Tyler's confidence had visibly diminished. He began copying me on nearly every operational email, hoping I would jump in and save the situation. I never did. One Friday evening in early September, as I was shutting down my computer, Derek appeared at my office door. "Nathan, can we talk? Off the record." I gestured for him to sit down. He closed the door and rubbed his temples. "This isn't working. The numbers are bad, really bad. Corporate is asking questions. Tyler is struggling. And quite frankly, we need your experience back on the front lines." I looked at him steadily. "Derek, 14 years ago I was promised a path to director. Instead, I received a public demotion in front of my peers. My role was deliberately reduced. Now you're asking me to do the full job again without the title, authority, or compensation that should accompany it." He had no immediate answer. I continued, my voice calm. "I'm willing to fulfill the responsibilities of my current position to the best of my ability. If the company wants more than that, then we should have an honest conversation about title, compensation, and reporting structure." Derek left my office without saying much more. That night, sitting on the back porch with Sarah, I finally told her everything that had been happening. She listened quietly, then took my hand. "You've given him enough, Nathan. More than enough." I nodded slowly. For the first time in 14 years, I started thinking seriously about what life could look like somewhere else, somewhere my experience would be valued instead of taken for granted. Little did I know that the opportunity was already quietly making its way toward me. By mid-October, the situation at Meridian had deteriorated beyond what anyone could politely call transition challenges. The Southeast region posted its worst quarterly performance in the company's 15-year history. On-time delivery had fallen to 74%. 3 major clients had either significantly reduced their volume or moved portions of their business to competitors. Warehouse overtime costs had skyrocketed because the new systems kept creating exceptions that required emergency manual fixes. Corporate leadership in Atlanta was now directly involved, and the pressure on Derek and Tyler had become intense. I continued showing up every day, calm and professional. I answered questions when asked, provided documented advice when requested, and never once volunteered to take back the responsibilities I had quietly withdrawn. Then came the call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon. My phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a calm, confident voice greeted me. "Mr. Reed, this is Richard Harlan from Vanguard Logistics Partners. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." Vanguard was one of the largest and most respected national distribution companies in the country, significantly bigger than Meridian, with a reputation for operational excellence and strong leadership development. "I've been following the performance of Meridian's Southeast Division for some time," he continued. "Word travels in this industry, as you know. Several of our mutual clients have mentioned your name repeatedly, always with high regard. They say you were the reason their operations ran smoothly for years." I stayed quiet, listening. "I'll get straight to the point," Richard said. "We're looking for a new director of Southeast Operations, full panel responsibility, competitive compensation package, well above your current level, and complete autonomy to build the kind of operation you clearly know how to run. Would you be open to a confidential conversation?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I replied, "I would." We met 3 days later at a quiet restaurant just outside Atlanta. Richard was in his early 50s, sharp-eyed and direct, the kind of executive who had clearly spent time on the floor himself. Over lunch we talked for nearly 2 hours. He asked detailed questions about real-world operations, not theoretical frameworks. He wanted to know how I handled carrier negotiations during disruptions, how I maintained client trust during crises, and what I believed actually drove long-term performance. At the end of the meeting he made me a formal offer. Director of Southeast Operations at Vanguard Logistics. Base salary 38% higher than my current compensation, significant performance bonus, full equity participation, company car, and a team of over 60 people reporting directly to me. Most importantly, they wanted me to rebuild the Southeast Division using the exact kind of practical, experience-driven approach I had developed over 14 years. I told him I needed 1 week to consider it. That same evening, I sat down with Sarah at our kitchen table and showed her the offer letter. She read it carefully, then looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "You've earned this, Nathan, every single bit of it." The next morning I walked into Derek's office and placed my resignation letter on his desk. It was brief, professional, and effective 4 weeks from that date. Derek read it twice, then looked at me with genuine surprise. "Nathan, is this because of the director position?" "No," I said calmly. "This is because 14 years of consistent performance deserve better than a public demotion in front of my peers. I've spent the last 7 months doing exactly what the company asked of me in my new role. Now I've decided to take my experience somewhere it will be properly valued." Tyler was called into the meeting shortly after. He looked pale. "We can discuss a counteroffer," Derek said quickly. "We're prepared to reconsider the director title and adjust compensation." I shook my head. The time for that conversation was 14 years ago, or at least before the leadership conference in Charlotte. I'm not interested in staying. The next 4 weeks were some of the most illuminating of my entire career. As news of my departure spread, the reality of how much I have been carrying finally became visible. Clients who had been quietly unhappy began openly expressing their concerns. Several long-term warehouse supervisors submitted transfer requests or resignations. Even some of the newer analysts started asking me questions they should have been directing to Tyler. I remained professional until my very last day. I completed all documentation, handed over every file cleanly, and wished the team well in a short, sincere email. On my final Friday, Derek asked to speak with me one last time. He looked exhausted. "Corporate is furious about the numbers. They're already asking why we let you leave. Is there anything we can do to change your mind?" I looked at him for a long moment. "Derek," I said quietly, "you had 14 years to see my value. You chose to see it only when the numbers started bleeding. That's not how I want to work anymore." He had no response. I walked out of the Meridian building that afternoon without looking back. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new corner office at Vanguard Southeast headquarters. The division I had taken over was already showing strong improvement. On-time delivery was back above 94%, client satisfaction scores were climbing, and my team was operating with a level of stability and professionalism that felt deeply satisfying. One afternoon, I received a message from an old colleague still at Meridian. "Thought you might want to know Tyler was quietly moved to a non-operational role last month. Derek is under heavy pressure from corporate. The Southeast region lost 2 more major accounts. They're now actively trying to hire someone with extensive operations experience at a much higher salary than they ever offered you." I read the message, closed my phone, and looked out the window at the busy distribution center below. There was no gloating, no sense of petty victory. Just a deep, quiet satisfaction that comes when you finally stop undervaluing yourself. 14 years is a long time to give to any company. I had given mine with honesty, dedication, and genuine care for the work. When that loyalty was met with public disrespect and broken promises, I made the only decision that made sense. I stopped carrying their weight, and in doing so I finally allowed myself to be valued at my true worth. Sarah and I recently took a 2-week vacation to Italy, something we had talked about for years but never found the time for. Emily graduated with honors and started her first professional job. For the first time in over a decade, I sleep through the night without checking logistics reports in my head. If there's one thing I've learned from this entire experience, it's this. Your expertise has real value. Your relationships have real value. Your quiet competence has real value. Never let any company convince you otherwise. Sometimes the most professional form of revenge isn't loud or dramatic. It's simply removing your contribution and calmly walking away, then watching as the numbers finally tell the truth you were never allowed to say out loud. That truth spoke clearly. And for the first time in 14 years I was finally free to listen to something better.